Good morning and welcome to the November 14th meeting of the Douglas County Criminal Justice Courting Council. My name is Pam Weegan. I'm the chair of the CJCC. This is a hybrid meeting. I want to pass on some information regarding how we will conduct our meeting. We ask that all members on Zoom please turn on video if you have it. We ask that all members on Zoom mute their line when not speaking. We ask that you please identify yourself each time you speak. If you're on Zoom, have public comment to make during public comment section of the agenda, please use the raise your hand function on Zoom. Recording of CJCC meetings are available on the CJCC website after each meeting. Our first item is a discussion about the Douglas County Legislative Platform with Katie Fitzgerald, our CJCC coordinator, and Mallory Lutz with the Little Government Relations.
Thank you, Pam. This is the first time I think that we're trying this. Every year about this time, like a lot of our government and politically related bodies do the county's drafting. This feels really loud. The county is drafting its legislative priority statements for the legislative session upcoming, and it seemed like a good time and a good opportunity to me to bring this for you guys to be able to get feedback about issues that are particularly important for either you all as individuals or your prospective discipline agencies or things that the purpose for this conversation is to identify any issues that as a CJCC we would like to elevate to the Board of County Commissioners for consideration of inclusion in the county's legislative priority statement for 2024. So we do have Mallory Lutz here with us that I think many of you all know from Little Government Relations. She's available, she's attending primarily to listen, to make sure that she understands the issues that are important to all of our members. But she's also available to be able to answer questions and provide information or context related to issues that you all are aware of or things that she's heard in Topeka that may come up in the next legislative session. Historically, the county's priorities as they relate to this body and to the population that we serve have centered around initiatives that increase necessary services that impact our population, a lot of affordable housing related issues, decriminalization of poverty, and increased access to treatment services for behavioral health and substance use disorders. So my thought was, I know several of you may have particular items to speak to. I wanted to start with DA Valdez, who brought an issue to my attention a couple of weeks ago around poverty, fines and fees, and related to driving. And so I'm going to turn this part of the agenda item over to DA Valdez, and then we'll kind of circle back for other issues that I have on my list from folks. So.
All right, so good morning, everyone. Thank you for just a few minutes. Mental health, of course, is making sure we have proper, mental health evaluations, those things, competency evaluations, LARNED, all those things at the state level are very important. I know that the sheriff probably shares, is in agreement with me that we've got, I think, the last time I checked, Jay, was it 12 or 14 waiting to go to LARNED for an evaluation, state evaluation. That makes it very, very difficult for us to prosecute those crimes that need to be and are in the pike, very serious crimes. So mental health is always a big push for us. So I hope that we get that this year and continue to get the legislature to think about that. But my area that I want to talk about today that I'm really going to support, whether it's individually or through some other sort of collaboration, is the driver's license suspensions for unpaid fines and fees. And what we've seen is that the statewide practice of suspending driver's licenses for unpaid debt really dramatically impacts economic well-being of people, households and our community, it also has a fiscal detriment to just the economy and our local, our businesses. Research shows that people of color and those experiencing poverty are more likely to have their driver's licenses suspended, and on average, their suspensions last longer. Recent data shows, and I want to thank the Kansas Appleseed Organization's nonprofit that's been kind of doing a lot of research. I know this is one of their agenda items also, sort of on a statewide level. But the data shows that about 150,000 Kansans have their driver's licenses suspended due to unpaid fines and fees. So this is definitely a huge number of Kansans that have their licenses suspended. Kansas ranks 6th in the country for such suspensions, and in recent years, many states, including California, Idaho, Kentucky, Mississippi, Montana, Nevada, Oregon, Virginia, West Virginia, Wyoming, have repealed their respective fee and fine-based suspension laws. I'm currently supporting a legislation that will do the same for the following reasons. As I've already indicated, the current law adversely affects people of color and poor people. It limits and hurts employers, and it has nothing to do with public safety, which is a role that I obviously play, the DA's office plays for our community here in Douglas County. And so that's an area that I'm going to be very, very impassioned about, and I will collaborate with anyone who is willing to propose legislation and to testify about it and to support repeal of Kansas law as it relates to unpaid fines and fees for driver's license suspensions. So unless anyone has any questions, I will turn it back to Katie.
Sheriff Armbruster. So two quick things. One, actually to tie on to DA Valdez, in that the mental health issue within the state of Kansas, as far as persons being incarcerated while waiting for a bed at Larned or Osawatomie, has changed dramatically over the last year, in that the state is now compensating county sheriffs and county jails for the time that we must hold these people, which is substantial. However, I do believe that the state is only throwing money at this to placate us for a time. If it costs them $15 million a year to pay this housing, they will continue to do that because it's way cheaper than building another facility, which is what I truly believe we need. They've built one in Wichita. So it is, I don't know that the Sheriff's Association is on board with this yet, but I personally am on board with trying to get another facility built, getting the state funding for it, having it built in the Kansas City metro area where we have a more robust employment pool, so to speak, as well as just a lot of experts. Second issue that I will be taking up with the KSA, if they're able to, I'm sorry, Kansas Sheriff's Association, but especially personally, is attempting to get workman's comp claims for PTSD for law enforcement and first responders so that they can be eligible to draw their earned retirement. As it stands now, blow your back up and can't go back to work, you can take a retirement, a medical retirement, and you can get your earned retirement. Break your brain, you have to go back to work because you need to continue to work until you hit a certain age or a certain designated years of service. And we don't want to put those folks back on the street doing the job that is already so very difficult. The opposition to this was twofold. One was Kansas SHRM, which is the HR managers, but that was a technical point that they had, and I believe that's been rectified. Right now, the fight is completely with the Kansas Chamber of Commerce, or whatever, the Kansas Chamber. They absolutely 100% do not want this to happen because it creates a bad precedent for what they believe to be private industry or something. So that is a fight that I'll be taking up personally with our legislators, as well as any others that are willing to fight with them. But other than that, if there's any questions or suggestions, I'm more than happy to listen, but that's what I have from the Sheriff's Office.
One of the other issues, thank you, DA Valdez, Sheriff Armbruster, that I think we've historically supported, and I've talked with Patrick Schmitz to see if, from the Burt Nash perspective, if he could share about supporting the expansion of Medicaid coverage for individuals, particularly as it relates to our justice-involved folks who historically just have very limited access to healthcare and healthcare coverage because they're generally not eligible for Medicaid. So that was one issue. Patrick, I don't know if you want to
No, I
speak to
think,
that.
yeah, thank you. Absolutely, that's something we've been working on for a long time, and it certainly isn't something new for Mallory to be advocating on behalf of our state for that Medicaid expansion. When you think about how essential healthcare is to life, whether that is simply being able to go to a doctor and have an annual physical, be able to get your prescriptions, or if you have a more serious chronic illness, whether that be medical or mental health, the cost of that is often more than somebody can afford on their own, and therefore they go without and end up in the system at a much higher cost level, the ED, the crisis center, inpatient facility, a state hospital, when it would be much more wise of us to take care of that issue while it is in the early stages rather than in advance. And then people end up in situations where they try to find a way to get the help they need or try to afford it, and then can end up in a system of revolving door problems. So absolutely, we need to do that and get it passed finally. The other thing that I think is important is the continued support for development of supportive housing. Yes, houselessness is a huge issue. And why is it an issue? Because there isn't a place for people to live. So let's get them a place to live and then work with them on the other issues that help contribute to that. But housing is, to me, it's a human right. It is part of healthcare. It is part of taking care of our fellow citizens. And so I know that our association will be pushing for more supportive housing funding, whether that's through directly or through some avenues that may be available through the CCBHC, the Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinic model. The next iteration of that released by SAMHSA does include an option for some support around housing. And so whether Kansas picks that up or not, they haven't decided, but I think we need to push for them to seriously consider that, because then that can help us fund support for people in housing. So those would be two big things for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Pam, did you have something?
Yeah, this is Pam Weechen again. Recently, I attended the Kansas Community Corrections Association meeting, and at that meeting, they talked about the Corrections and Juvenile Justice Legislative Interim Committee had some interest in reviewing the structure of community corrections, court services, and parole. And I think they framed it as a unification of those services. I think that's come up before, consolidation, better known as. And the KCCA is obviously opposed. They feel that there's needs to be local control in those decision-making, that those things should be around what communities need versus what the state wants to do. I just think that I would like to request that the county put that on their platform, that they're opposed to consolidation or unification, whichever term you want to use. And that's what I'd like to add.
Folks have other items? Generally, some of the other pieces that we've talked about on the county side as it relates to this group, in addition to supporting expansion of Medicaid coverage, expanding eligibility for WIC and SNAP benefits to individuals who currently are ineligible for those assistance programs because of prior convictions and criminal history, particularly on the SNAP benefits. That's a resource that a lot of our clients may not qualify for, but are desperately in need of. So that was an additional item. And the continued provision of local use of the Kansas Fights Addiction funds to provide local, might be more of the decision-making locally about how to use funds for additional treatment services, harm reduction practices, prevention resources. That money is continuing out of the state. I know DECA recently received an award from them, but from that fund. And I believe Mallory can kind of help clarify this, but I believe kind of what the legislature is considering around those funds is rather than kind of one-time, shorter-term projects, looking at longer-term projects. Am I making that up? No, I'm not making that up. But we anticipate probably not hearing about that for about another year for the next round of funding. So as we hear more about the potential for what that next round of that funding could look like, I think a lot of groups around here will be interested in that, and we'll be sure to share that for potential opportunities locally for us to use those. I know this might be a sticky wicket, but are there potential funding? Are there areas of funding? I know for a while before we had bids here locally, one of the things we were advocating for was funding from bids to be able to support an office here, but are there funding things that we may not be aware of? I know everybody needs money, but in particular ways that agencies might need support in that way. No. Okay. Are there other items that folks either here in person or online might want to share before I turn this over to Mallory to kind of wrap up and for her to share some observations or things that she is aware of that may be coming from Topeka next year? Okay, seeing none. Mallory?
Mallory Lutz, it's nice to see a lot of familiar faces. I've enjoyed being part of the discussion today, hearing what you all are working on, and that's helpful for me as I talk to folks over in Topeka in just 50 some odd days. So I don't know as I necessarily have a ton to add, but if it's helpful just to add a little bit of, context as to where we're going and what I think is going to happen come January 8th, whether those things come to fruition or not remains to be seen. But I think it's just helpful to have maybe a 40,000-foot view of where we're headed. As we all know, we're headed into an election year. And so that typically means that legislators are eager to get in and get out, and particularly on some of the issues that we've talked about today, people not exactly eager to take a stance and take a vote on some of these things. So that, of course, will be at play. Medicaid expansion, I know if you had to ask if it's going to happen, I think maybe half of us in the room might say yes and half of us might say no. If you would have asked me a month ago, I would have said, heck no. I have to say, I think that the governor's renewed push and her kind of statewide tour, if you will, to talk to people and get folks riled up about this, I think it's having an impact. I think in the last couple of weeks, you maybe have read the news or seen press releases about different folks that are jumping into the conversation, and increasingly we are seeing pretty conservative folks jumping into the conversation and saying, this needs to happen. And in the context of mental health in particular for farmers and ranchers. And so that has invigorated a whole additional group of people that really hasn't been at the table before. So I see Patrick nodding along in agreement if that's your assessment as well. But so we'll see what happens with that, but certainly some renewed enthusiasm. Couple of other things we've been hearing about. Haven't really talked about this because I didn't think anybody was going to do anything with it. But as we know, we're one of 3 states that does not have a Good Samaritan law. And there is currently a Republican lawmaker down in Wichita that is kind of taking the lead on this and plans to introduce legislation. So I think in the context of response to the opioid crisis and building on the work last year of decriminalizing fentanyl testing strips, I think this would be really, really exciting to see happen. Fentanyl testing strips, I think we might next session see a little bit of an effort to broaden that a bit. I know xylazine has become kind of the next thing that folks are looking at, so be keeping an eye on that. Mental health and SUD funding, I don't know, I'm sure many of you maybe watched the Special Committee on Homelessness last week. You had a lot of colleagues or acquaintances in the room lending their perspectives. And as we know, kind of the theme that came from that was you have homelessness on this side or unhoused on this side and wanting to be housed on this side and this box in the middle, right? And so folks really talked a lot about needing to increase funding for mental health and SUD treatment. So I can talk a little bit about driver's license issues. There's a viable bill that's been out for a couple of years, Senate Bill 2. That Senator Fascadeau down in Wichita, she really has been a champion on this issue, obviously, for years. And as we know, it's a statewide issue, but I mean, especially in particular in Wichita. And so that I think kind of might be the vehicle to put some of these more fines and fees issues in as well, because I think right now it really is kind of structured around folks with revoked licenses, letting them have a restricted license. Beyond that, would go a little bit, I know I've talked about some specific issues, but kind of getting back to broader picture. We know that there's going to be about a $3.5 billion ending balance in fiscal year 2025, which is great, but it also means that everybody's going to be coming to the legislature asking for money. And we also know that they did not pass any tax relief last session. So you're going to have a large volume of people asking for a large volume of money. And then you're also going to have a legislature that is eager to give some tax relief to folks before they head to the polls in 2024. And property tax relief also fits into that as well. I know Sarah and I could talk about that all day, but others maybe don't care as much about that. So kind of big picture overview, couple of specific issues. So beyond that, was there anything that I didn't mention that you were hoping I would talk about? Okay, happy to answer, yeah.
Good morning. The question I have is fines and fees. What is that bill number? Because I would like to follow that through the legislature.
Yeah,
Or do you have it on hand?
I don't have it on hand. So Senate Bill 2 is the one that I referenced that I think that is probably the one with the most legs, maybe. I can get you some other examples of hearings last year because the biennium, but yeah.
I got it covered.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I
Thank you.
appreciate that.
Are there any more questions for Hillary or Mallory and Katie? Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Our next item is an update on the failure to appear work group with Judge McCabria and Susan Binkelman, the Chief Court Service Officer.
Yeah, do you want to have, you can. I don't.
Did you have slides that you were gonna
There
go through?
is, no, I was just gonna, those couple of slides that I'd sent you. Just these couple of slides I had sent you.
Okay. Well, I am Judge McCabery. Been working with some other folks on the failure to appear group. I see Marvin present. He's been with us on that. Susan Benkelman is our Chief Court Services Officer. She's been offering some good insights on things. You know, where we started with this is trying to identify what's unique about Douglas County failure to appear. There's lots of information in a general sense about the concern being when you fail to appear and we don't have another means of getting you to court and bench warrants issue. And I see the group's focus as, are we utilizing that sort of heaviest approach of getting people back on track and into court in the lightest way possible? And so, identifying what's the size and scope of the cases we have with active warrants. We chose to utilize a 1-year time period going back from the end of March of this year to the previous year, because that's the most complete data that we were able to access. Identify the number of cases where failures to appear occurred, and in that universe, how many don't result in failure to appear warrants being issued. How many do? How many times does a person have to fail to appear before a bench warrant issues? I think we've gotten some good sort of broad numbers together on that, and we are at the point where what we're going to have to do, I think we've exhausted our ability to look at it from just running the numbers on the databases that we have available and start looking at actual docket sheets and case histories. And Susan volunteered to assist with that, because that's going to be a very labor intensive, not just herself, but to have the court services officers go through, help us start looking into those sorts of things. And so that's the update on sort of the approach that we're taking. I don't want to offer too many hard numbers today or even suggestions on what we think that data may mean, but in broad terms, this is my own editorial, I suppose. The data that we are turning up is sort of consistent with what my experience has been just from an observational standpoint. And that is Douglas County, the defense attorneys do a good job of saying, Judge, my client's not here, but I've had contact, and here's reasons why they may not be here and why we'd like another opportunity to appear. The district attorney's office, I think, does a reasonable job of looking at that and thinking, what's the type of case we're talking about? What are the circumstances? And giving the judges room to give people opportunities. And then the flip side is, once you've failed to appear a time or two, and we've tried to find other ways to get you to court, we're utilizing that tool. But I want to be in a position, and I think the group is going to be in a position to give you some numbers to see and analyze, and then give us your feedback on what you think we found. And we're looking at, alternative responses, maybe what other jurisdictions have done. I think pretrial does a fantastic job of reminding people to come to court. Are there other sort of automated ways or other methods we can use to help with those things? So in all the time that we've talked about this, since I've been around in Douglas County, I feel like this group is at least getting it pushed in a direction where we're down to looking at some actual history and being able to have useful information to present. So the progress hasn't been maybe quite as fast as we might like, and part of that falls on me, and part of that is because we had our statewide case management system fall apart, which took up some time and focus of the court, but I think we're moving in the right direction. And so I don't know if Susan has anything to add, or anybody else who's here who's on the group. Give that opportunity. So, okay, thank you all.
I would share, I think that Judge McCabery and some of the data analysts in district court have done a really good job of trying to make sense of understanding kind of what happens before we see a warrant issue. And I appreciate their work on that. Judge Kopecki is in that group as well, and he's talked about, we're trying to kind of get some support for him. I think the district court has provided a good framework of how to look at failure to appear in that process, and so we're going to try to give Judge Kopecki some support there to, as similarly as possible, to be able to help him do the same analysis on the municipal court side. And we've talked a little bit about kind of where the things that, to build on what Judge McCabery had said, there's a lot more data kind of questions that unfortunately will come from the more tedious kind of file reviews or such. But we have some other questions that we've talked about wanting to try to look at that are up there. So we have, I think there's kind of some ongoing data kind of mining. And we talked a little bit at our last meeting. So this group met last week to talk about essentially to try to inventory what we do, our agencies that interact and work with clients who are involved in the justice system. What are we currently doing that provide, like, how are we notifying? Oh, what did I do? Okay. Trying to kind of inventory what are the practices in place right now that provide notice to clients about upcoming court dates. And the idea with this is not just part of what we talked about last week, and it was towards the end of the meeting, so this is kind of, I think, a conversation that will be continued, but thinking not just about you have court tomorrow or you have court next week, but how are we communicating more broadly about what happens, like the purpose of the hearing, what are the options for what are the options if you are not in compliance, if you don't have all your information ready for that court date. We had heard some examples last week from Judge McCabery and from Brad Finkeldye of examples of cases where people feel like they don't know, right, what to do different, and so I'll just not go to court. And so there are opportunities. Where do we have opportunities to increase communication and better share information with folks? And then where are the opportunities to make that better? But also, one of my goals with that would be to try to identify, as we inventory these, to identify where are the pockets of people who are not necessarily part of receiving all of those information, right? Pretrial does a really good job of making sure that their clients have court date notifications, but what about if you're not on pretrial? How are we reaching those folks? We know the same with bids, but if you're not a bids client, how are we ensuring that court notification? So that's kind of one of the places I think we're going. And then we have had lots of examples. Pam has shared lots of examples from other jurisdictions about different practices. And so that's kind of on our radar too, is just to kind of have that as an opportunity to reach out or look at other jurisdictions of how we might be able to implement or things that we might be able to consider around increasing court notifications. So this group has been I really enjoy this work group. It's a large work group, and I think everybody who is a member has attended every single meeting that we've had. So I have appreciated them, and I think there's been, from my perspective, some good conversations, some good work happening. But between Judge McCabery and I don't know if there's folks who are on that work group that have anything else to share or want to share anything about if we missed anything.
Just real quickly with the municipal court, the thing that we're running into a little bit is with the data. It's just very hard with the antiquated software that we're using, and we don't have any dedicated support, unfortunately, in the municipal court for mining the data. So we're hoping that the district court will help us out a little bit with that, and so we're hopeful that we'll have some numbers that will be a little bit helpful to kind of look into it more deeply. But the other thing, just mentioning real quickly, is we've been running into, in the municipal court, we've been trying to embrace this texting idea to give reminders to defendants, because it's been found in other jurisdictions that there are good responses for people when they're reminded right before court that they have court tomorrow, for example. But we have been experiencing a little bit of issue with defendants that are not wanting to opt in to the text. So that's been kind of a problem we're trying to address and figure out how to deal with. I think we had looked last week and we had, I think there were like 60 people that we had identified that had a particular docket. And I think only 10% of those 60 or 6 people wanted to have a text sent to them. So we have to kind of figure out how to deal with that also.
Apropos of not much, except I found the statistic interesting as I was doing some research that failure to appear for court and failure to show up for your medical appointments, they run about the same. So people have reasons why they don't show up for all sorts of things.
Thank you, everyone, for your input. I think we're going to move on. Katie, don't leave. You're going to talk to us about KJCC assessment project?
Probation violation.
Oh, I didn't see that on it. Sorry.
Go ahead. Susan's going to do this one, this update. I'm just going to do the
I'm gonna
slides.
try. So similar to the district, or to the failures to appear, we created a work group. I think we have a good representation of people who are involved in probation violations. It's a good group. A lot of really good ideas are coming out of that group. And similar to the failures to appear, to better understand the factors and processes of probation violations, we need to collect data directly from our local probation officers. So that would be both community corrections and court services. This work group has discussed completing the file reviews from both of our probation offices so that we can look at the volumes, types, and outcomes of the violations of probation. A smaller subset of the work groups was developed, and it is looking at creating we have created a data collection template for these file reviews. And kind of once we started this process, we realized very quickly that this is more complicated than any of us anticipated. We aren't quite sure how to capture the components of each probation violation that we need. Some of what we've laid out to collect includes information about underlying cases that resulted in an individual being placed on probation, the conditions that were violated and how many of those violations occurred, and also the seriousness of violations. We felt it was important to try to capture this, as not all violations are generally viewed the same, and the response to violations should vary based on the seriousness the violation is. For example, a person crime or a victim crime may be weighted more heavily than a misdemeanor property crime. Some of the ways that we're trying to capture this more objectively is looking at whether and which special conditions of the probation were assigned and violated. Special conditions are generally viewed as highly important by the court, and when they are imposed, they should be equally important if they are not followed by the client. Special conditions are generally geared towards reducing recidivism and are tailored to address the needs and risks of the individual. Many times, the special conditions involve things such as programming or treatment that will definitely help that individual. So the next immediate steps for this work group is to finalize the data collection template and to complete the actual file reviews of district court probation violations. We will be reviewing the draft data collection template with Judge Glover and Dee Dee Knapp of the District Attorney's Office on Wednesday, so tomorrow, to get their input. And we will make any necessary changes to the template based on their review. After that, we will review and seek additional feedback from the entire work group at our next work group meeting. As court services and community corrections staff test the data collection for usability, we are trying to get a sense of how long this data collection process may take. So far, it's kind of been a tedious process. I was trying to input a couple files, and it was taking me between 20 to 30 minutes to review the file because we're trying to capture dates and outcomes of all violations for every affidavit that has been filed in that case. Once we have completed the file reviews, we will be able to have a better idea of what the next steps are and should be able to share a more informed picture of the probation violations of our jurisdiction. You have anything?
This was another situation, I think, where it feels like, well, it should be easy, right? It should be easy to understand or capture this data, and it's not. It's challenging, and it's been, we kind of thought that we pulled a lot of information together, meeting with the officers, just to say, so from a probation officer's perspective, what are those things that are important that would elevate these cases for you to want to go back to court for this individual? And I think we adjusted that every time that we thought of new things, and as of even this morning, there were still questions that we went, oh, we're not really capturing that very well, or is this important? And then, well, what do we do with this? And so this is a very iterative process, and a lot more in depth probably than I think we were quite anticipating, because particularly for these, this is not information that's readily extractable out of Odyssey or Full Court or a database file. It really is a file review. So, but this work group has also, I think, been having really good conversation, and the members are really engaged. And Judge Glover and Dee Dee Knapp especially, I want to make sure to acknowledge both of those two. They've been really attentive and active in this group, and I think that will be really helpful for this work group to be able to provide meaningful information. So
This is Pam. What's the timeline in terms of the review? What's the time frame?
Well, that's probably potentially going to change as well, but we started with May 1st of 2022 through June 30th of 2023. I believe we based that on Matt's last document or data pool. Is that correct?
yeah, we were trying to capture that initially with when the probation violation weekly docket started, and it started the mid-April 2022. But we might change all that. It's challenging to look back, but what we're finding is it's challenging to look back because the closed cases we might not have equal access to, being able to pull all of that information, particularly in light of Odyssey.
So without participating in the work group, just talking with Dee Dee and understanding the work that she does from our offices, on behalf of our office, is that this approach, I'm not surprised to hear what you all are saying. It seems that, at least from our perspective, we're trying to address each individual as an individual, very holistically, right? So what are the resources out there? What is it that the individual is supposed to do? What is it that they haven't done? Is there any way that we can try something else? And so I can see why it's very difficult to capture, you know, to put data on paper when it really is about people. So I just wanted to let you know that I kind of empathize. I'm glad I'm not on that committee. I'm glad Dee Dee's doing it. But the point being from our end is that I strongly believe the whole effort really, when probation violations are looked at from whether it's the court's perspective or it's, you know, our court services or probation, anyone who's working with that individual to make them successful and to keep them on probation. It really takes a community effort, and I'm convinced and very impressed with just how much effort goes into all of that before, you know, ultimately the state is asking for revocation or the court is considering doing that. So it's really kind of my way of saying, it's hard to do, come up with, it's very holistic, and two, by the time these things are brought to the court's attention, and the court has to pull the trigger, I think it's one of those exhaustive, it's like everything's been exhausted to ensure the success that has been tried but has failed with this particular person, so that's just my 2 cents.
And I would agree with you on that. I think Pam would agree that those affidavits don't even get filed until we have tried everything we possibly can. We work very hard with these individuals, and there's just a point where you have to file that affidavit.
And knowing that one of the things that we're trying to capture is to kind of better operationalize what is trying everything. Like what does that exhaustive, when we say we've exhausted resources, we've tried everything. What are those things? What's the volume of those things? And that is hard, as you say, DA Valdez, that it's to take a file and make it to adjust that. We're trying to talk about and put on paper a person's story, and it's hard to kind of it's been challenging to figure out the best way to do that, and the way that is not, as Susan shared, this has been quite cumbersome, and we were just trying to test, like, you know, to test what is the process like for the officers as they're going to start filling this out, and it might be revised.
Yes, as we got into the process, and then you would go from one file to the other file, you have 2 different individuals, so you have 2 different ways of handling the situation based on that individual. So it did become very difficult very quickly.
And trying to make sure I think this group really wants to be sure that we're providing, that as we're looking at things, we're looking at enough or the right information to be able to present a really thorough and kind of accurate picture of how do we view it. And I'll preface, this is all just on district court, so we haven't even talked about municipal court, Judge Kubecki, with that, but at least for our district court parties, how do we view probation violations? How are we working with them? How are we responding to them? And to be able to provide a really thorough picture of that is, it's been a little tedious, so we appreciate patience.
Can I add sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, to the extent that part of the function of CJCC is to help communicate and educate the folks who are interested in watching what's happening, I really appreciate DA Valdez's comments, Susan Binkelman's comments, who's been a court services probation officer for a long time. And the thing that I would want the community to know is what's being said is this district focuses on the individuals. And I see the attorneys on both sides, the probation officers, consider the individual circumstances. And statistics are good, and I'm support the group giving us the information they can, but the best thing that can happen on a probation violation is individual circumstances are considered so that right outcomes can occur. And there's all sorts of things we need to educate ourselves about in making those decisions, but this is going to be a tough thing to, I don't know what the exact goal is in terms of showing, other than showing approaches and general principles. It's hard to put up targets to meet, because if you're doing that, you're not paying attention to the individual. So that's my 2 cents on sort of presenting that to the community as they watch us do this work.
I do not know very much about probation violations, but as you were talking about that, I was thinking about a failure to appeal deal. And, the adage sometimes, when you collect data, you actually can, sometimes change what happened. So I was just thinking, and again, I don't know how I'd work in probation violation, but I wondered if, if we came up with a protocol that every time you issue a warrant, you fill out a form that says, how many times do they fail to appear, check, create a data sheet that we can enter into. Did they receive a text message? No. Did they sign up for text messages? Yes. And at the same time that we're collecting that data going forward, it's also reminding whoever the judge is at the time, hey, well, maybe I should think about this before I issue this warrant, or maybe I should, see, and then and again, I don't know how that would work with probation violations, but if you had that form and you were filling that out as you went, so instead of spending so much time going backwards, think about going forward, and then that also might be a checklist of, oh, we didn't do that in this case. Let's think about in this case. Maybe it's not applicable in this case, but at least, yes, no, NA, and then we have a form going forward, and then we can have someone enter that data and over the next so many months. Anyway, just a thought.
I think that sounds pretty close to kind of what Katie was thinking about in terms of sort of documenting what are the different tactics and strategies that could be used and are used. So how do we sort of document those pieces that, hey, these are the variety of things that are tried, not necessarily all of them tried 100% of the time, but that are the menu of options that really can be used. So, I think that's, that, even though it's not a data point of like 67%, it is still, I think, a reasonable outcome from a work group.
There's also some examples of similar to a bench card of similar to how we would conduct ability to pay hearings, but kind of taking that idea and applying it to a non-appearance and kind of walking through a decision tree of do I issue a warrant? Am I going to issue a warrant or not? So there's some other resources similar to that that we can add to the list that we dig up to kind of review. But
if I may, just real quickly, and I don't want to speak for Judge McKeevery, but I think as judges, we try to look at those things that are available to us, and if they're in one spot, maybe in a file or in our software, then that might make it a little easier. But I suspect that we're already kind of taking into account most of those things. So I kind of want to get away from the idea of having kind of a robotic judge that just looks and says, oh, there's 3 failure to appears and they didn't sign up for texting, so there's a warrant. I want to really have it be an individualized approach to each person. And so I think that would be the only feedback I have on that.
I will just add on, I could not agree more. And I think if I can toot the horns, at least of district court, and from what I know of Judge Kopecki, I think what matters most in all of this is you have people who care, and I don't mean just the judges, but I think it's done thoughtfully. And I want to get the numbers out of the fair to appear work group, and I want to be able to present those things, but when it's over with, you can have an AI generate your decision, or you can have a person who's experienced and invested in it. So, and the only other thing that I'll add in is as people listen to us, and to the extent you hear me say, leave us alone, that's not what I'm saying. But, you want the judge's focus to be on the case and not the statistics. So there's that balance. And it's just tough. It doesn't mean we don't care. It's a lot to put together. And I feel like we're getting farther down that road than we have before, so.
Folks have other questions or comments for the work groups or about kind of where we're at with the work groups? I appreciate for all of you, all of our members, but particularly for, I want to be sure I also appreciate Judge McCabery's leadership in the failure to appear group, and digging into that data with us, and for sharing the updates today. So.
Thanks, Susan. Katie, you're up next. Give us an update on the CJCC assessment project.
So when did we meet? Last September? JMI, we had the Justice Management Institute staff, so JMI kind of introduce themselves and this assessment process to everyone in September. Since that time, they have, we had sent out a survey, and they had completed interviews with a lot of you. They are wrapping the interviews up this week. The survey closed a few weeks ago. To all of you who did participate in all of those, thank you. After they complete their interviews later this week, they are going to start transitioning into the report writing phase of the project. And so we anticipate right now the projected timeframe is that we'll receive a draft report of their findings and recommendations in December. We are looking at the January 2024 meeting of CJCC to have JMI present the overview of their report and recommendations and kind of walk through at that point, what do we want to do next with that? That's at the moment the time frame that we have for them. Part of the process after that point, we do have them budgeted for a site visit and to be able to come out and work through however we as a group feel like that attention, that time might be best used. So I would anticipate that in the early February is not spring, right? Like late winter-ish. I'm not used to seasons. But after that January meeting, then having them come out for a period of time to work with us around some of the recommendations that this group would like for us to be able to focus on. So we anticipate at some point, it will probably be, I think, mid-December that we'll get their draft report. So there will be kind of a fairly quick turnaround of between when we receive that and when they're here to present that. But I appreciate all of you who spent time with JMI in the interviews and look forward to hearing all the things that people had to share. So.
Thank you, Katie. I want to provide an opportunity if anybody has any organizational updates or have any discussion items they want to bring up before we open the meeting to public comment. Do we have anybody who has anything they want to add or offer? Okay, next we'll open up for a public comment. Do we have anyone in the?
We do have some folks online. Going to promote them to, I think actually Robin has to do it. Robin, can you move Terry Wilkie into the panel and for public comment? Terry, you're in the panel. You can come off mute and provide your public comment.
I in fact did not attend to make public comment. I'm used to going to city meetings and just sitting quietly. to learn what our city is doing, our city county.
Okay,
But since
sorry
I
to
have been
interrupt.
specifically asked, and I can't tell who's speaking on this Zoom, if that's you, Sarah. If that's you, Sarah, let me say to you, I just read the paper cover to cover, and you are doing a great job as a county administrator, and thank you very, very, very much. Okay, so now then, while I'm on the topic of shooting my mouth, let me tell you all, thank you very, very much for your good work. Thank you for your articulated interest in trying to make our criminal justice system as fair as it can possibly be. Now then, if I'm going to say a critical thing, I'm a little aghast at the rolling of the eye and the constant reference to, oh, this is a lot of work, this is a lot of work. Okay, understand, people. I'm retired from 30 years of civil rights investigation. Government work is a lot of work. I mean, you'll never be done with it, okay? So good on you all, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Rick Kagan also has his hand raised. Robin, can you move Rick into the panel for public comment? Okay, Rick, you're in the panel if you want to come off mute and provide public comment.
Yeah, briefly, yes, thank you very much. I appreciate having the chance to sit in on your meeting and learn about your progress. I think it's great to hear the updates from the two work groups. I know that other work is continuing through racial disparities on competency issues, competency to stand trial. And so I'm particularly interested in the updates next year about the assessment project that Katie was referring to. And I'm hoping somewhere in that process of kind of looking at the results from that survey that we might have a chance to revisit the VERA report. I know that the VERA report is responsible for launching the discussions around failure to appear and probation violations. Yet there are other issues to be looked at the report. And at some point, I'd like to see us review that, have the commission rather review that and identify some other potential follow-up and work groups that might come out of that. Again, thank you. Look forward to your upcoming meetings.
Thank you, Rick. That's the end of public comment. Do we have anything else for the good of the order today? Seeing no one raise their hand, this meeting is adjourned. The next CJCC meeting will be on January 9th, 2024.